Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Boy, this has been really interesting for me, and I frankly don't quite understand many of the issues. Like, are we the only country that doesn't trade with Cuba, Mr. Claver Caron?
We do trade with Cuba. We sell them agricultural products, and we have exemptions as well.
But like the embargo, what I don't understand is why, if we open the trade up, since the rest of the world trades with Cuba, why hasn't that opened up the regime? That doesn't work. So why adding us on there? How does that?
Good point.
How does that open up the regime more than the rest of the world already having a trading relationship, but already having difficulties in getting paid? So how does, if we do that, how is that going to make it different than the rest of the world failing and their economy still being a failure?
Well, I always argue the fact that all of the countries that do business with Cuba and have not promoted any type of positive change, in that regards, when people say the U.S. has a failed policy, I would say, well, why do we want to follow the failed policy of even more countries? At the end of the day, whether we agree with U.S. policy towards Cuba or not, it is a principled policy which conditions certain fundamental rights and security concerns. I mean, and Congressman Scott had mentioned the whole Iran versus Cuba. Iranian President Rouhani is going to Cuba today to meet this week to meet with the Castros. They're not going to discuss anything that promotes U.S. interests. This is 90 miles from our shores. So there are other...
Well, I agree that I think there's a very, very bad security risk for America to have them there. But another thing that you mentioned in your testimony was that trading with... There was testimony, you've heard testimony here how that trading with Cuba would benefit U.S. farmers, but it seemed to me that you didn't feel that was true. So can you explain that position?
My argument was, what I was saying is, when we've had the previous hearings, as the ranking member was discussing, when they previously discussed this issue, the whole argument, now it's about financing. It used to be about the definition about cash in advance. And in 2000, it was just about authorizing. In 2000, the argument was, if we authorize agricultural sales to Cuba, that was going to fundamentally change Cuba because we're going to have all these interactions, et cetera, et cetera. It hasn't done so. To the contrary, it's made the funnel even narrower. And what I want to do is broaden the funnel so that Cuban people be able to partake.
Can you tell me more about why you think that the exports have gone, or the trade has gone down, and how do you think that the squeeze, so you mentioned squeezing Americans. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Because essentially what the Cuban regime wants is the same as it's gotten from Brazil, Vietnam, and others. Essentially wants us to pay for it, it wants our taxpayers to guarantee it, and then essentially wants to just control it. So therefore, and it wants, also non-related to the issue today, it wants U.S. tourism. Tourism is its #1 source of income. So you'll note that when, and a lot of you that are that go down with farm delegations, what the Cuban regime always argues is that we need more American tourists to come down so they spend more money so then we can buy more products from you. That's unrelated per se, but that's essentially how they're trying to, go around and squeeze Congress on issues that are non-ag related.
Let me just ask another question similar to Ms. Graham mentioned, and that is, is there any kind of an incremental demand that we can make on the Cuban regime to free things up to, a tit for tat? If you do this, we can do this. What is the way forward that would? Give me a concrete idea of what to do, other than I don't see an idea.
I just laid one before you with the Congresswoman's question. If you were to simply craft a bill to say we'll allow private financing with Cuba, with private companies operated by private entrepreneurs in Cuba, like we do with every other country in the Western Hemisphere, frankly. That's how it works in every other country of the Western Hemisphere. We don't do it through a state entity in that regards. So if we do that, that seems to me like a positive step to press the regime to say, hey, you're not going to be able to control everything that comes from the United States. And, and I would arguably say that that would be an interesting move.
In the short time I have left, can you tell me more about the American assets that have been confiscated by the Cubans, and now we're going to be using those assets to...
Congressman, I know the owners of the American owners. They were American in 1959 of the Port of Havana, of the Port of Santiago, where a lot of these agricultural exports that go to Cuba go through and are transported through. Those were stolen without compensation. So we have to recognize that every ag sale that's made to Cuba, even under these terms, is essentially trafficking in another American's stolen property. That issue should be addressed because that's frankly unfair to the American victims that were, I want to say kindly, that were screwed over.
I'm out of time.